Salutations, ladies and gentlemen, the Knife Raven here, back again with another video, and in today's video I will be taking a look at the second of my recent Rosecraft knives, and this is the French Broad Jack. It's a very interesting little knife, and one that I am quite excited to share with you today. So, without further ado, here is the knife and the box that it came in, same as the other Rosecraft knife with their logo, their website. You have the model number. This is the RCT, Rosecraft Traditional 007, French Broad Jack. And of course you have the pull tab. And it came wrapped in wax paper. So, there we are. And here is the knife. It's a very simple, traditional style knife. Bit of a curious pattern name, and one that could be debated, but it's a simple jackknife with a fairly broad Wharncliffe blade. Broad jack, there you are. But we have satin finish D2 tool steel here, stainless steel bolsters, nickel silver pins and rosebud shield, and an all steel back. So again, I commented on the other Rosecraft knife that I discussed a couple weeks back, that being the Rosecraft Holston River Surgeon's knife. I mentioned that one of my favorite aspects about the knife was that there were only two colors, really, in the entire knife, and that was black and silver. And here we have a similar situation, however, instead it is red and silver. And in my opinion, it just makes for a very clean look on these knives as a whole. We'll take this one out of the way and talk a bit more in depth about the French Broad Jack. So this is another Andy Armstrong designed knife, which does not surprise me, considering I actually have another knife that I believe was also designed by Andy Armstrong, back when he still was active with Rough Rider. And that is one of my favorite knives, actually. The Rough Rider Reserve Wharncliffe. Now, this is a knife I talked about around a year ago, maybe a bit sooner. And it's a very simple little single blade jackknife with this nice tool steel Wharncliffe. I spoke quite highly of this knife, and I still very much stand by what I said a year later. But you can definitely see there is a bit of a similarity here in terms of the knives at hand. We have steel bolsters on both, D2 tool steel on the blades, which are Wharncliffes in their profile, although the execution of the Wharncliffe itself is a little bit different on the two. Similar size as a whole, with the French Broad being a little bit smaller. But these are both very nice knives, and I think perhaps in the future I will do a comparison video for, or maybe one could call it a buyer's guide, of which of these two I would more highly recommend. But in the meantime, this video is dedicated solely to the Rosecraft. Now, the fit and finish on this knife is very, very good. Not quite perfect, which I don't think I could say about the Holston River Surgeon's knife, as this knife was as close to perfection as you can get. Everything was just seamlessly done. I had no complaints about this knife whatsoever. Here, I have one issue, and it's only one, which is still a lot less than many knives, but I'll get into that in a second. We'll start with the good. First and foremost, the liners, the transitions from them to the spring, perfectly seamless. There's no gapping on this knife whatsoever. Holding it up to the light, nothing shines through. So beautifully executed there. Incredibly smooth, very clean overall. The transitions throughout are very good. Again, this is bone on the handles here. So you will notice a difference in material, but in terms of being raised, The craftsmanship here is very good. I will say this pin is a little bit more noticeable than the others. Now, does that mean it's noticeable enough that I'm going to complain about it? No, but it is a bit coarser compared to these, which are considerably smoother. Of course, we have the polished rosebud shield here, which is also a nickel silver. It's a very clean shield. I'm kind of happy that there's no excessive print on the shield itself. Case. The other side is the same thing. We have two very, very, very smooth pins and then one slightly less. But again, it's not so bad that I would complain. Blade centering is pretty good, close to perfect. Let's see if I can correct it. Doesn't look like it, but it's ever so slightly off to the right. Again, in terms of perfection, I suppose this would make the knife imperfect, but to me, I'm not going to be bothered by that, as it's still very, very close to center. As long as it's not rubbing, that's when my complaints begin. But very well done, if not perfect. The blade itself has a nail nick to open, which, unlike the Rough Rider, which has a match strike pull, the Rosecraft French Broad Jack is a plain nail nick. It's a very nice one at that, very well ground. The blade does protrude quite a bit, making this knife pinchable, and it has a very nice action. Beautiful half stop, and a very nice snap. If I had to rate this, I would definitely say this is more of a 7 or an 8 pull. Again, I might be desensitized to particularly strong springs, as I'm used to Arthur Wright knives, which have 9s and 10s occasionally, but definitely compared to the Rough Rider, which is probably more of a 6, maybe a 7. I'd say closer to a 6. Still very snappy and has a nice sound to it, but compared to the Rosecraft, there's no comparison in terms of just stiffness. We have a very nice action here. With the half stop, the spring is quite flush in the half open, half closed position, which isn't something that a lot of knives are known for. Most of the time, in the half open position, you will still have the back of the spring sticking up a little bit. In the case of the Wharncliffe here, it's better than usual, but you can still see there is a bit of it just sticking up there, even though it is perfectly flush when fully open and closed. So the Rosecraft does a very good job of that. Transition again from the spring to the blade is very good. The only thing that you can really see here is a little line between the two. But other than that, very well done. Blade play is non-existent in any direction with this knife. It's very, very stiff. The grind here is, I believe, a flat grind. And the knife came extremely sharp, which I can confirm is the same thing with my other Rosecraft. These do not come anywhere near blunt. They are using sharp pretty much right out of the box. Of course, if you wish to give them your personal touch-up, then by all means you may do so, but it's not necessary. The blade finish here is streaky. I would call it kind of a half mirror polish. It's not quite shiny enough to be reflective in the truest sense of, say, a Taylor's Eyewitness Premier Collection, which is pretty much a hand mirror. But at the same time, it isn't a, say, more typical satin finish like you'd see on the Rough Rider. It's a little bit shinier, but not quite a mirror polish. So, interesting finish. I actually quite like it. It's kind of a bit more of a fingerprint magnet than a typical satin finish, but a bit more utilitarian than the typical mirror polish. So very nice blade. You have the swedge, which is very well ground, very, very well done on both sides. The blade is quite broad, all things considered, and carries quite a bit of edge to it, but it tapers down to a very nice fine point. I will say, compared to the Wharncliffe, you can very clearly see the difference here. The Wharncliffe is a little bit shorter, and it tapers to an even more aggressive point. But both are Wharncliffes, just one happens to be quite a bit broader. Also note how the swedge on the Wharncliffe starts very soon, whereas with the Rosecraft it actually starts after the nail nick. The blade steel, of course, is D2, which is a tool steel. It's not quite a stainless steel, and it isn't quite a carbon steel. I know that seems confusing. A stainless steel is, for the most part, rust-resistant, if not rust-proof, meaning that you can get it wet and get, say, certain acidic things like apple juice on the blade without it tarnishing, whereas carbon steel will rust and patina quite easily. D2 will accumulate a patina, but it is quite easy to remove. And while it does have a certain degree of vulnerability to rust, it is much easier to keep rust-free than a carbon steel. So your fingerprints likely are not going to cause this to rust. You will need to actually leave it in moisture before that will actually happen. So it's a nice steel. It can be brought up to, I think, a maximum of 60 HRC, which is quite tough. Resharpening on it is fairly moderate. There are definitely easier steels to sharpen, and there are certainly more difficult steels to sharpen. So I'd kind of put it in the middle of the road in terms of sharpenability. And it does hold an edge for a decent amount of time. So good all-around steel, and one that I personally quite enjoy. Again, as I've said, it is also featured on the Wharncliffe here. So, very nice blade. We have the Rosecraft stamp here, RCB, Rosecraft Blades. We have the Andy Armstrong logo, or crest, followed by D2 steel, and then the number RCT007. So, very, very nice, cleanly executed blade. The bolsters, which are on both ends of the knife, are brushed stainless steel. Again, I very much appreciate stainless steel bolsters, as really anything that isn't nickel silver to me is quite special. We have in the current age of traditional knives, brands like GEC, Case, Arthur Wright, they almost exclusively will use nickel silver, polished to a high gloss, whereas brass and steel have become quite uncommon, so I always appreciate to see them. The inside is very clean, and there is a stop pin, so no blade wrap on this knife. Would carry nicely in the pocket. The joint, however, isn't quite sunken. It isn't either on the Wharncliffe, but it is a bit closer. You can see it still juts out a very slight bit, but I'd say if one were to fit in the pocket cleaner than the other, I'd say it would be the Wharncliffe. Measurements on this knife, you are looking at a closed length of 3 3/4 inches, an overall length of 6 3/4 inches, and a blade of 3 inches, just on 3 inches, although that is quite a large unsharpened tang, so the cutting edge is 2.5. Whether or not you want to declare this UK legal, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, and so because I am unsure of how the regulation works, as I've had many conflicting answers, I will not declare this a UK legal knife. However, the cutting edge is by all means under 3 inches. It's a very comfortable knife in the hand, perhaps even more than the Wharncliffe. The shape of the handle, coupled with this very nice part of the tang, makes for a very, very nice grip, and considering the blade's profile and how broad it is, this would make for a very good working knife. However, despite being what would be quite a good working knife, this knife is probably designed more with the Gentlewoman in mind, as the material here is quite extravagant. We have dyed bone, and I believe the exact name of the bone is smooth apple bone. That's a very realistic name, as this side, don't know how well the camera can pick it up, carries the hue of a golden, pardon me, of a red delicious apple. It's a very dark, deep red. It's a little lighter on camera, but it has a very nice, almost maroon color to it, ranging between red and pink. Also has these little black flecks running throughout, which the camera probably won't be able to pick up, and that is part of the natural, I don't know if I'd call it grain, of the bone. On the other side, it's a bit lighter, I'd say veering more to the pink side of things. And this, I guess, don't know what apple would be lighter in color. Maybe a Royal Gala? But beautiful, beautiful hue here. And the sides are not the same. You can even see with the poor camera quality, this side is darker than that side. I know to some people that would be bothersome, but I appreciate the natural look of it and how no two sides of the knife are same. And I have seen a variety of these and reviews on them, and each time the bone does have some difference in it, being a natural material and all. So I very much appreciate that. Now, on to the problem, and this is based on the fact that this is a natural material. The transitions between the bolster and the bone are quite messy. You can see the bone is raised quite a bit, and you can very much feel this on both sides and on both ends. This is probably the more noticeable, but it is a bit irritating. As aside from that, this knife is beautifully executed. Comparing it to the other Rosecraft knife I have, which is smooth in every single aspect, it is unfortunate, but bear in mind, this is micarta, which isn't likely to shrink or swell with the temperature and moisture in the environment, whereas bone and wood are much more likely to be affected by such things. So I'm not going to blame the craftsman who made this, because there's a good chance it left the factory in perfect condition, but when it came into my naturally dry climate, it is going to change in its dimension. Even a subtle change can ruin what might have been a perfect transition here. So I'm not going to say that this is some sort of quality control issue, as really it is not going to affect the knife in any real way. It's still very much a good user and a good knife to look at, but at the same time, I will acknowledge that it is not perfect, as there is a bit of a noticeable transition there. So then again, as I said, not a complaint, but by all means, with natural materials, this has happened to me before, and it's nothing I'm going to hold against the knife, really. But I will be honest in my review, it is not perfect. If it was, the blade would be just that little bit more centered, and there wouldn't be that transition issue there. But aside from that, this is a lovely, lovely knife, and considering its price of around 50 GBP, I believe, so about 10 pounds more than an Arthur Wright, 10 to 20 pounds more. Very much worth it. Again, this is only my second Rosecraft knife, and I am incredibly impressed with the two that I have. I think that this brand, it's only been around for a couple of years, I think 2021, and they have already, if not cornered the market on quality traditional knives, they are definitely doing a good job of stepping right up to the top of the game. And I'm not exaggerating when I say I have two Rosecrafts and two GECs, and I think the Rosecrafts might even be superior. So, there you are. This is a beautiful knife. I think that it's just a lovely little design, and before I forget, French Broad refers to a river, as all the names on Rosecraft's knives are tied to rivers, the Holston River, the Clinch River, and the French Broad. So there is that, but even so, this is a delightful little knife. So I'm very pleased with it, and I would absolutely recommend it. So thank you very much for watching. This has been the Rosecraft Blades French Broad Jack, and this is the Knife Raven, as always, signing off. Goodbye.